First of all, thank you for having me here. I must say that I'm very moved to have bringing memories from the past, and I literally made a scenery drive from 2004 when I first met Marcello till today. And I must say that you made me think about Jenny did, which would be my two books. And I would say Codes of Life and Chance and Necessity. So a lot of what comes now is an attempt to conciliate that, but I cannot neglect either poetry and fiction in my readings, and I'm brave and optimistic enough to believe that there are common grounds and shared principles in order to develop creative artifact building out of all these dimensions. So I like words. I will try to use them in the least minimal way we have consensus for them, but don't bother with definitions because I will be talking about things I don't understand about. So let's try to focus on intersections and combinations, couplings, cohesions, and possible interactions, productive interactions. It starts well. So, tell the self how key are the words. Kant has stated quite beautifully in his critique of poor judgment the idea that living things are not reducible to natural laws and mechanic causes and explanations of such a kind, which becomes quoted often as there will be no Newton of a blade of grass. And in my view, there are two main pathways of hard science that dealt with this question. There is the approach that puts its emphasis on evolution, and then it's concerned with changes in lineages, and it gives priority to genealogical processes concerned with reproduction and variation. This amounts to Darwin, Monod, Jacob, Meyer, Edelman, Dobzhansky, and many others, I would believe. And then we have the emphasis on physiology, and this has to do with individuality, autonomy, organization of parts in a whole, maintenance, homeostasis, autopoiesis, keeping it as functional. There I would say, for me, because I'm a big Francophile, this would start with Claude Bernard, but it goes through Maturana, Varela, Canguilhem, and so and so. And hopefully, more people would be a bit inspired by that. Rosen certainly was. Sorry, because I think I coach you, not Rosen, because I wouldn't be skillful enough to do so. And then where I think code biology comes into scene is because it can deal with both aspects. It talks and it deals and it dwells on physiology and evolution context because it it comes with the concept of code poiesis. And then we have a genotype, ribotype, phenotype ontology, and we have two mechanisms or processes for evolution. We have conventions and selection, as my dear friend Edelman had proposed earlier, because we are not throwing things on the garbage, we are synthesizing them, and for me this is important. But he has mentioned that also physiology works by convention and selection. And Marcello will say that he didn't mention convention, but he did. And I'm positive about it. So, and yeah, we are then we have a research agenda that deals with creation and conservation of organic codes. And for me, this is important because no matter which framework we get for semiosis, I think this much we all agree that the key property at the origin of cellular life is manufacturing semiosis. This much said, let's talk a bit about semiosis. And I'm no linguist, so I couldn't do a proper review on that. I think Don did with Sibiac. I will stick to Patrice Moniglier, that follows the structuralist lineage from Saussure. And for me, what will be important along this paper is that the sign has a paradoxical nature. It can be fixed and static, but at the same time dynamic and mutating, synchronic and diachronic, predetermined mechanical action formed by, but at the same time they seem to have infinitely open-ended life. And then, if I have the time, I will discuss a little bit how they can be cognitive and social also at the same time. But I don't think so, that I will have the time. The point is that those things provide the basis for us to think about code biology, semiosis, and language sign semiosis from a linguistic perspective in ways that could be interesting. So just a disclaimer, of course, languages and cells are very different sets of artifacts, but they both have, these are Marcello's words, a genetic algorithm that starts producing the objects, and an explanatory procedure that brings into existence additional epigenetic properties. So languages and cells produce and are produced by, because I think this is the trick in artifact making, organic creative artifact making. But although I contend that cells are not interpretive, we can say that languages are manufacturing and associative. And so I will talk more about languages as cells than the other way around. And most importantly, cells and languages are creative. Then we come to the second canonical question, the why question the what question I talked about already, but there is also the how to know life question. And of course they get intermingled, merged, coupled, whatever you think. But the point here that will interest me is that in many conceptualizations, it seems very necessary to look at stable configurations of the system, even if they are stable yet provisional by nature. So Canguilhem talks about the fact that a living thing is, in the true sense of the word, a synthesis. Marcello talks about the invariance of life, the organic codes, and the cell is the first stable configuration of such. The Minho talks about the total organism as the ultimate epigenetic expression of the genetic message itself. So it provides something as the closure and the context Mario wanted for codes, not floating codes, never. And high-dimensional attractors from the perspective of Kaufman and complexity sciences and systems biology would go on this path, proposes high-dimensional attractors or possibilities of stable solutions to cell dynamics. Anyways, we would be dealing with, for analyzing such as synthetic beings, we need mechanism, and this Marcello has discussed over and over, and evolving models. So, and then narratives emerge. But I believe that also to tell stories, we need to depart from stable configurations. Either living, evolutive, developmental, individual, literary, poetic, scientific. We need cells, we need keys, we need nexus. And then I like the way Maureen Emali, a natural philosopher of sciences, define the cell as a nexus. Connections between history, philosophy, and science of cell biology. And the nexus approach focuses less on the cell, or the keywords for what I will discuss later, as well-defined stable objects, and more on its role as a mediator of fundamental living processes. So if you look to cell narratives in terms of new words it coins, we have conserving, like when you talk about concepts, models, applications, historically, and here I'm really talking about time and knowledge. When new concepts are coined, there is a bit that is conserved and a bit that is created by association. So cells remain, and then you have cell trees, cell lines, cell fates. If you talk about the cells themselves, they also do creative things as trans, retro. But here we are talking about determination and differentiation. And in order to reproduce, they remain also cells. So why keywords and not only words? And here I'm real huge risk because I don't know anything about programming or how to build ontologies, but what is important for me, again, it's the common principles of how things occur. So if we look at the building of biomedical ontologies using keywords, we have that ontology-based mappings and annotations use it in many applications and analysis tasks. Continuously updated dependent artifacts are continuously dependent updated artifacts, and they undergo evolution. Ontology-based mappings up to date in the presence of evolving ontologies. So I think this must be key. What works as a sign for a stable configuration of semiotic unity evolves. Us triggered to behave by a sign. So this is interesting. If we go back, let's say, it's not very important the definition we use. Again, I will stick to the minimal. So this is Peirce, basically. But we have a sign that is an icon by similarity, a sign that is an index by physical links, a sign is a symbol because of a conventional link. And we are mostly talking about conventional links. It doesn't mean that they don't proceed by physical links before and so and so. And we won't go to what symbols allow us to do for the time being, because this is a special instance of what they can do. I'm more interested in the way they come into being. So we could say about keywords that the frequent pattern of expression of a given word becomes a symbolic sign for a community, the material basis for indexation codes to manufacture new objects. That's how words become keywords. And by the other hand, keywords being coded entities are also become signs that will be used by annotation codes and the building of adapted ontologies, which are also keywords, which further become signs for indexation codes. So we are really talking about dynamic ontologies. We are also talking about merging ontologies when we talk about keywords. And this is a big trend on finding solutions on how to evolve ontologies in biomedical sciences. In life sciences, ontologies are used to describe components and functions of organisms. And since many ontologies refer to the same domain and the same object, makes me think about all the interactions and the Venn diagrams Yanni has shown, Robert has shown. So one sign has different mapping possibilities. So because of that, there is a growing need to integrate or merge such related ontologies. The goal is to create unified view on the two or more input ontologies. And just because of the words, I think it's quite nice how scientific publishing borrows other fields' lexicon. But anyways, so cells as semiotic unities. This is an old work of mine, 2008, about sulfates and signal transduction. Even I don't remember the details, so don't ask me a lot. But the point is that we have something very similar to what each of one called by a different name. We have direct mapping and transduction cascades, actual interaction between molecules, but we have also coupling, merging, blend, mapping, oscillations, cycles, patterns to cell behaviors. And then the meaning is different. I don't know if in this context I can talk about a code, 20 codes, or only coding. This is a question. But what is important again is that the ontology is dynamic. And then signal transduction inputs in single cells is different than in multicellular organisms or adaptive cell networks. And I won't go too much into this, but only to talk about bacteria not evolving new codes. What I had proposed then was that there are stable configurations that are solutions to the living systems, and at each stable configuration they have a streamlined alternative and a fancy alternative. I call it frugal and fancy. So prokaryotes, I would agree, didn't change their internal codes, although I also agree with Yanni that they did evolve new codes. But the basic scheme of the cellular thing remains. Eukaryotic cells, the event of the nucleus, has raised lots of potentiality for further change. So this is also something which is important, this future-oriented organization, where at the moment the things arise, okay, they arise because codes were fixed, conventions selected, but there is a lot of potential materials for building new things. By the other hand, the streamlined situation is much more sensitive to changes, and it can collapse if something changes. So it tends to remain very much the same. And then on the self level, eukaryotic cells evolved into unicellular beings and multicellular beings with development, embryonic body plans and all this. And then multicellular organisms evolved into sense configurations, which the two canonical examples would be the central nervous system, which is a streamline in the sense it is hardwired, and I doubt it will change a lot, evolutionarily speaking, and the adaptive cell immunity, which is not hardwired. Here we are having different properties. There is converging gain of complexity, of course, but you're basically coupling transitions in cell states. So first cell growth, cell cycle, then cell cycle, cell fate, and then cell fate, cell function. You always have to create and perpetuate. So you need codes. Merging ontologies are also a reality when we make this big jump. Now I will be talking about cognitive landscapes and not implying that the cells do the same thing with mental images, representations, interpretations, but the merging, blending dynamics is similar. So cognitive metaphorical mapping defined by Lakoff, this is the classical definition, he says it's a mapping between two domains. Life as a journal is the canonical example. So you define life, which is a very abstract thing, with a more familiar thing, which is a journal. This is a way to think about metaphorical thing. Kovacs goes a bit further and talks about conceptual merging. And he says that representations being ultimately selected to share aspects of the world with others, metaphors become the creation of a shared sphere of attention, where new metaphorical meanings can emerge. So, yeah. And then when here is more language, we are talking about metaphors, although there is the jump to cognition. But then cognitive sciences. I like the attentive Turner, which says that blending is the mental operation that accounts for linguistic powers such as unifying, coupling, and merging patterns to create expression, and at the same time analyze expressions they encounter to recognize patterns that were combined to produce them. So this is not recursivity, this is what Yanni knows. I forgot the word. Starting with the simple mapping to expand words into metaphors. From cell and its 4 dictionary meanings, which are box, room, unity, and closure, you can proceed step by step, very much as in a signal transduction cascade, because the next step has to be activated by context somehow. You can arrive from box to origin, from room to place, from enclosure to disease, from unity to organization, and so and so. But this is one aspect. Because a cell is a word, but a cell is also a world. Sorry about the word game. But so from a room, a chamber, and an affiliate, we have echoes in discoveries about actual cells. So they were first observed as small rooms in the cork sections, and they weren't even alive at this point in time. And the word comes from cella, small room. Progressively, you have protoplasm is to be analyzed as a geometrical space lattice, so divisions in a space, animal tissues being composed of cells, and a small body found within a plant cells. So the metaphor becomes the cell is a place, is life's place. And this is operational for a long time, actually. Lately, I think it becomes clearer with all those findings that the cell is actually a landscape. I won't go into that. I think you know all the codes that had to be discovered to proceed from models again. Waddington's to Alice, which is the person who formalized the stone codes first. But we can go further. And in literary theory, or not further, but more chaotically assembling things. Because again, I think it can be productive. So in literary theory, some attempts consider fiction as a cultural practice and its context. So it has a conventional taste to it. And the word, originally the verb has to do with model, build, imagine. And the noun has to do with personification, representation. So it's the building block of, it's the way to go to narrate, to tell stories. Importantly, there is no contextual or textual, there is no textual, syntactic or semantic marker that allows for the identification of a fictional text. And reactivity in fiction is not a psychological or social symptom, but the free space for differentiation and choice by the individual life. So we come back to the two strains of biological thought I mentioned in the first slide. I'm sorry I'm making you sleepy. So we can try to merge dimensions to tell stories, merging ontologies. And the work from Laura Altis and Membranes does so. So the way the discovery of membranes is appropriated by literary narratives in the context of the beginning to mid-20th century. I will just say that it was important at this transition between 19th and 20th, for instance, that the membrane was a defense instance. Koch and Pasteur had became microbe hunters, and identity felt really threatened by foreigners, agents that are outside. And then we have, I don't know, like Sherlock Holmes saying that I always considered the tiniest things, the invisible ones, infinitely more important and dangerous, for instance. So this is a way to put things in parallel and maybe have keys of mechanism. As narratives go, So we have differences between the biosemiotics and the code biology narratives. And for Sebiok, life and semiosis are coextensive, okay, but he understands semiosis as coextensive with interpretation. So it's always was there kind of narrative, a mythic one, really. And then code biology proceeds more as a formation novel, romantic, step-by-step, historically constituted by natural conventions and selections. And it does not require. If we come to biolinguistics, another thing that tried to formalize meaning production in living entities, Chomsky thinks there is a generative mechanism called universal grammar. Okay, but as if it was a determinate set of laws. For code biology, the rules of universal grammar, or the principles and parameters of syntax, are much more likely to be the result of organic codes rather than an expression of universal phenomena like the periodic table, the principle of least action. So those are different narratives that have the possibility to be read as fiction. Done nicely quote Renéton, and I think one of the reasons why I love reading Marcello is because it reads as a novel, and this is resonates somehow. And then a word about models, to be fair to Rosen. I really like the way Arantxa Echeverria, who is a philosopher of science, thinks about models. And she says, the recognition that some scientific models may have properties of the kind Canguilhem attributes to living beings, that is to say, they are also emergent, creative, and syntactic, and they oblige scientists to interact with their products instead of just analyze or represent them. Maybe a landmark separating different views of science. And I think we stand there somehow. When we talk about poetry, because I couldn't finish without mentioning poetics, the ones of you who know me know that this is a very dear subject to me. What we owe to poetry is almost everything we know and experience. Make poems is to produce models of experience, and without them, we would make sense of almost nothing. Of course, now we are talking about the how to know life question, not about the what is life question, but there are intersections. And then Rosen says, and this Marcello will kill me, but I will say it anyway. A living system is a system that contains a predictive model of itself and or of its environment, which allows it to change state at an instant in accord with the model's predictions pertaining to a later instant. I won't go into the merit of cells having anticipatory skills or not. But I think the orientation into the future is important as exploratory strategy. And there is nothing supernatural about it. It's constituted by this dynamic ontologies and merging ontologies and the convention and selection of organic codes. We are very material from the origin. And I do enjoy when scientists make poetic uses of concepts and so on. So I quote Jenny, if an organism is our universe of discourse, the cell is the star we gaze. And it's Jenny's emphasis to Wolkenhauer phrasing. In its complexity and functionality, even the simplest, tiniest cell dwarfs everything humankind has ever been able to engineer. And then he translates it into material agents and problems and challenges. And then I would like to finish with a Brazilian poet and biologist who actually makes artifacts that account for everything I've been talking about. So this is an example. It's called Cipher, and it's a transgenic poem. You can buy it. It comes with the Petri dishes and the sequences. You can transform the bacteria to express it. And what he did is that he invented codes to write words and sentences using combinations of nucleotides. So of course there are the canonical ones, but for instance he needed all the letters. And to make these new letters, he made new combinations of nucleotides. That the machinery reads as it reads. And of course it mutates because there are lots of 2 nucleotides frames, and those are not tolerated. So what he does, it's that he expresses this phrase, which is a cat attacked, a tagged cat will attack Gattaca. What is literally what happened. It jeopardized the organic code, Gattaca, and which then pass on their offspring, combining with words of other organisms, because this happens in bacteria a lot, through mutation, natural loss, and exchange of DNA material. New words and sentences will emerge that you can sequence and see what has evolved from that. So with this, I leave you. Thank you.
I would like to know if there are any questions or comments.
May I just make a small correction? Rosen didn't say a living system and then that it's an anticipatory system that has that. Whether all living systems are anticipatory from the cell up to us is debatable. We are certainly anticipatory living systems, but now the interesting thing is if you now start going down in the hierarchy, when does it stop being anticipatory? And that is where Marcella would say, no, a cell is not anticipatory in itself, but of course something with the brain is anticipatory.
I think I agree.
I don't, but that's another question.
We can discuss it overlap. But I think it's an unsolved question.
Yeah. Well, it's also a question of how you define it in the end. And
sure.
Yeah.
Can I just add something? I mean, I believe that the whole story is modeled by the fact that biological systems operate simultaneously across different levels. Mm-hmm. So you do not have a cell. You have something that generated the code of the cell millions of years ago. Still, this is in the picture. So what is the system is very debatable because it's open in space, it's open in time.
Exactly.
So what is anticipatory? For sure, living systems are anticipatory, no matter, at least it's been my, which level you want to, but then when you define an enzyme, it is living, is a part of a whole. Yeah. So the whole story is, to me, difficult to settle.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree.
Dynamical intelligence, it depends on the level that is signaling.
You should go to Gaia to start discussing. What makes sense to us is the accumulation of all the experience that we had in the last million, Gaia. Right. That is an instance, it's not even a type. Yeah. It's what happened. That's it. The Tao. Already has a name. Right?
I'd like to say that I enjoyed very much your reflection and thank you for sharing with us. As an engineer, for me, an artifact is an object produced or shaped by human craft, especially a tool, a weapon, or an ornament. If I rephrase it as an artifact, meaning as an object produced by a cell, is for you the language an artifact produced by a cell, a module, a code? Could you comment that?
Marcella's definition of an artifact, you can phrase it better than I can.
Well, an artifact is something that is made by a machine, by a manufacturing process. It's not made by a spontaneous set of things. So, in order to, there are spontaneous molecules and there are artificial molecules, artifacts. And in fact, in my opinion, life started when the first artificial molecule started being manufactured. So, artifacts is something made according to a project, according to a sense, not spontaneous things.
Yeah, in this sense, I think it's not mechanical causes and simple stereochemical interactions. It has to be an adapter that builds objects that were not there otherwise. Yeah. They wouldn't spontaneously arise. They arise by arbitrary connections. If I feel very shy to speak loud about this because I'm on the audience that set the concept. So but
there is this difference between, according to Kant, he makes a difference between natural way of making things and human way of making artifacts. In fact, the basic misunderstanding that nature is building life as an artifact. So the real origin of life is an artifact. Things is not.
He couldn't get everything right, right? He did a lot already. Right?
You have quoted Chomsky. Have you studied context-dependent grammars? If you have studied that, perhaps the environment is the way we explain the arbitrary mechanism that explains how language appears. And how cells can be the entities that make languages possible as a result of evolution of all those complex biological systems.
Definitely. I think so. I'm not familiar. I must study linguists.
For engineers, artifacts are not just a mechanical construction. They are intentionally evolvable products of experimentation with the environment where we want the artifacts to work with. So they are not predetermined, they are intentionally evolvable so that in the end they result in what we want us to be a final solution for the problem that we want to solve, at least partially to solve.
In that context, most of the molecular biology using artifacts.
Discussing consciousness of intentionality of cells.
Well, if you take the example of language, for example, you have the main theories about the Chomskyan theory about syntax. Language is a syntactic operation. And if you follow the development of language during the lifetime, you can see that there is a phase, the interaction between child and mother, which has nothing syntactic about, just semantic, giving meanings to things. So there is a phase where semantics prevail, and then 4 or 5 years later, a bit, when a child goes into the community, then comes in the syntax. So you see the process of building a language goes through this component, semantic things where there is no syntactic syntax, and then it develops and becomes. And in both phases, you got creative things, you got new kind of artifacts, new kind of rules about them. But if you follow a natural process, the natural evolution of language, how it develops, you can find that these different components of language appears at different stages, and each of them has a different function. So, reducing language to syntax is a big mistake. I think it's
Absolutely. Chances.
There are artifacts in semantics, and there are artifacts in syntax at low level. So, kind of artifacts is the big one.
When we work in ontology engineering, what we want to understand is semantics. We start by the syntax, but the ultimate goal is to understand the semantics.
I'm really.
And this evolves. The semantics evolves.
Yes, semantics that we may fix for understanding the way the system has evolved and how it works. For us engineers, it is important to study biological systems or physical systems so that we can
With Robert.
mimetize
The
and
database.
yeah.
Seriously, it's something that you should cooperate about that thing. Well, let's see. Hopefully. Okay, Robert, get in touch with Ricardo and see what you can do. All right.
So, no more questions addressing to Marcel? No? Is that all?